At 66 years old, I sat across from my husband of 37 years and signed every document his lawyer put in front of me. My own attorney had her hand on my arm, whispering, "Please, Dorothy, please think about this." I smiled at her, picked up the pen, and signed my name on every single page. The look on my husband's face when I did it was something I will never forget. Pure, undisguised relief. He thought he had won. He had no idea I'd been planning this moment for 3 months. Let me take you back to where it started, because nothing like this begins overnight. Frank and I met in 1987 at a hospital fundraiser in Columbus, Ohio. He was 29, a man who fixed things with his hands and made you feel like everything was going to be all right just by the way he stood. I was a surgical nurse at Ohio State Medical Center, and I thought I knew something about steady, reliable people. I thought I was good at reading them. 37 years later, I found out how wrong I was. We built something real. Or at least I believed we did. When Frank's small contracting business struggled in the early years, I worked double shifts. My salary kept the lights on while he built his client base. When he needed to get his general contractor's license, I sat at the kitchen table with him every night for 6 months, quizzing him on building codes and safety regulations. When he finally passed, I cried like he had won the Nobel Prize. When the business started to grow and he said he needed someone he trusted to handle the books, I gave up my track toward head surgical nurse and came home to learn QuickBooks and manage invoices and payroll. That was 2001. I was 42 years old. For 22 years, I ran the back office of Callaway Construction. Not officially, not on paper. Frank always said it was better to keep things simple, that putting me on the books created tax complications. I believed him. I trusted him the way you trust the ground under your feet without thinking about it. Because you have to. The first sign came in the fall of 2023. I noticed Frank's phone was now always face down on the table. He had never been someone who cared much about his phone. When I mentioned it once, casually, he said the screen cracked and the brightness bothered his eyes. I didn't push it. I should have. Then came a receipt I found in his truck. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for our insurance card after a minor fender bender in a parking lot. The receipt was from a restaurant in Dublin. A nice place, the kind we went to for anniversaries. Dinner for 2. $180. The date was a Thursday night when Frank had told me he was at a job site in Westerville until 10. I put the receipt in my jacket pocket and said nothing. I started paying attention differently after that. The kind of attention I used to give to patients in recovery, watching for the small signs that tell you something is wrong before the monitors do. Frank had gained weight, then lost it. He was buying new clothes, which he never did voluntarily. He came home some nights, smelling like a department store. Not cologne exactly, just clean and different. The way a person smells when they've recently showered somewhere else. I found her name the way people find these things now. Accidentally, on purpose. He left himself logged in on our shared home computer, and his email was open. I wasn't going to look. Then I saw the subject line. Can't stop thinking about last night. The name in the sender field was Amanda Voigt. I closed the laptop and walked outside to our backyard and stood there for a long time. It was February, cold and gray, and I could see my own breath. I thought about 37 years. I thought about the restaurant receipt and the hotel charges I'd since found on the business credit card, 4 of them, in cities where Frank had supposedly been meeting clients. I thought about Amanda Voigt and what she might look like and whether she knew about me. Then I went back inside, made dinner, and acted like nothing had happened. That night, I made a decision that saved me. Instead of confronting Frank immediately, I opened a new email account on my personal phone, one he didn't know about, and I started taking photographs of everything. bank statements, business credit card records, invoices, the original partnership paperwork from 1988 when we registered the business together as Callaway and Associates Construction, both our names on the filing, before Frank quietly had it re-registered in his name alone in 1995. I had kept every document from 37 years of our life together in a filing system in the basement that Frank teased me about constantly. You'd find a receipt from 1,990 if someone asked for it. Dorothy, that's right. I would. I photographed the original 1,988 registration, the one that read Frank Callaway and Dorothy Callaway, co-owners. I photographed letters he'd written to suppliers in the early years, signed by both of us. I photographed tax returns from 1,988 through 1,994, where the business income had been filed jointly. I photographed every hotel charge on the business credit card going back 3 years, 22 nights in hotels in Columbus, Cincinnati, and Cleveland. Most of them were 45-minute drives from our house. I also called my daughter Megan, who lives in Portland, and told her I might need a good divorce attorney's name when the time came. Megan didn't ask questions. She just said, "Mom, write everything down." She works in corporate law. She knows things. I spent 3 months building my case before Frank ever knew I'd found anything. I did it quietly, carefully, the way I used to prep a surgical suite methodically, without panic, because panic in that room gets people killed. Then I confronted him. I waited until a Sunday evening in March. I cooked a real dinner, the kind that takes most of the afternoon, pot roast, and his mother's recipe for biscuits. I set the table nicely. After we ate, I put a folder on the table between us. Inside was the hotel receipt I'd found in the truck, 3 of the business credit card charges, and a printed copy of the email from Amanda Voigt, the one I'd seen by accident. Frank looked at the folder without touching it. Then he looked at me. "I need you to tell me how long," I said. He didn't deny it. I'll give him that. He sat back in his chair, and the person I saw in his face was not the man I married. He was a stranger with my husband's eyes, tired and caught, and not particularly sorry. "About 2 years," he said. I kept my hands flat on the table. "I've already talked to a lawyer," he said. His voice was steady. "I want a divorce, Dorothy. The house is in my name. The business is in my name. You haven't been officially employed by the company in any capacity. You'll get some money. Something fair. But don't expect a fight over the assets because you don't have standing to make one." I looked at him for a long moment. "Who's representing you?" I asked. He named a firm in Columbus I'd heard of. "Aggressive. Expensive." I nodded slowly. "I'll contact my own attorney." He seemed relieved. "Good," he said. "Let's keep this civil. We had a lot of good years." I didn't answer that. I picked up the folder, went upstairs, and closed the bedroom door. I called Megan and asked for the name she'd been holding for me. I made a mistake early on that I want to tell you about, because I've since learned that other women make the same one. After Frank told me he wanted the divorce, I was so desperate to get out of that house, out of the atmosphere of it, the way it felt wrong now, like a room where the air had changed, that I packed a bag and moved into my sister's spare bedroom in Worthington. My first attorney, a woman named Carol, told me not to leave the house before the divorce was finalized. She said it could hurt my position in the settlement. I did it anyway. I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. That decision cost me some leverage, and I want to be honest about that. If you're ever in this situation, don't leave. No matter how much you need to, don't leave before the paperwork is done. But I got ahead of myself. Before I moved out, I had already done the most important thing. I had called the attorney Megan recommended and gotten on his calendar. His name was Robert Keene. Megan had found him through a colleague in Columbus. His office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, and when I walked in with my folder of documents, he didn't shake my hand right away. He looked at the folder first. "Let's see what you've got," he said. I gave him everything. The original 1,988 registration, the joint tax filings from the early years, the business credit card charges, 22 hotel stays over 3 years, totaling just over $60,000. The letters Frank had written to contractors in the 90s, where he referred to Dorothy and I as co-owners. A signed contract from 1993, where both our names appeared as principals of Callaway and Associates. And 3 years of bank records I had quietly photographed that showed a pattern of cash transfers from the business account to a secondary personal account I had never had access to. Robert Keene read for 40 minutes. He didn't speak. I sat in the chair across from him and looked out at Columbus below and thought about 37 years. Finally, he looked up. "Mrs. Callaway," he said, "your husband made one very significant error." "What's that?" I asked. "He underestimated your filing system. We filed the motion to contest the settlement on a Thursday. Carol, my first attorney, had already had me sign Frank's proposed agreement, $40,000, my car, and my personal furniture. That's what Frank's lawyers had offered for 37 years and a business worth close to $2 million. I had signed it, just as I'd planned to, 2 days before Robert Keene filed the motion to set it aside. The argument Robert made was clean and devastating. I had signed under duress, without full financial disclosure, and with representation that had not advised me of my rights as a potential co-owner of a jointly founded business. The original 1,988 registration alone was enough to reopen the question of asset ownership. The credit card records opened a second front entirely. Frank called me the morning after the filing. I was at my sister's kitchen table, drinking coffee. "What are you doing?" His voice was controlled, but I could hear something tight underneath it. "Protecting my interests," I said. "You signed the papers, Dorothy." And then I retained new counsel and filed a motion to set aside. "Robert explained that process to your attorney this morning." A long pause. "This is going to get ugly," he said. "You tried to leave me with $40,000 after I ran your business for 22 years, I told him. "You used our business accounts to pay for 2 years of hotel rooms with another woman." Ugly isn't the word I would have chosen, Frank. But all right. He was quiet. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. It was softer, and I recognized that softness. I had loved that softness once. "Dorothy, come on. We were good together for a long time. I made some mistakes. I know that. But you're 66 years old. Do you really want to spend the next year of your life in a courtroom?" I thought about that question seriously, because it was a real one. I was 66. I had mild arthritis in my left knee. I had grandchildren I wanted to be present for. I did not particularly enjoy conflict. Then I thought about 22 years of unpaid work and $60,000 in hotel rooms. "Yes," I said. "I do." He hung up. Robert filed a request for forensic accounting of Callaway Construction the following week. The accountant he brought in was a woman named Dr. Patricia Walsh, and she was meticulous. It took her 6 weeks. When she was done, I sat in Robert's office and looked at her report and felt something cold move through me. Over the past 3 years, Frank had diverted approximately $340,000 from Callaway Construction to personal use. The hotel charges I already knew about, but there was more. A car, a late-model Audi, registered in Amanda Voigt's name and paid for with business funds. $86,000 in credit card charges for jewelry, clothing, and what appeared to be a security deposit, and first several months of rent on an apartment in the Short North neighborhood of Columbus. Amanda's apartment. where Frank had been spending 2 or 3 nights a week for 2 years, while I thought he was working late on project timelines. He had also, Dr. Walsh found, significantly undervalued the business in his financial disclosures to the court. He claimed Callaway Construction was worth $900,000. Dr. Walsh's analysis, based on revenue, contracts, equipment value, and market comparisons, put the true value between 2.1 and 2.4 million. The same day Robert filed the amended complaint with the financial fraud findings, Frank's attorney called and asked for a settlement meeting. We met at a conference room on the north side. Frank came in looking like he'd aged 10 years since March. He was thinner in the wrong way, the way people get thin when they're not sleeping. His attorney, a man named Gerald who wore expensive shoes, sat beside him and opened the meeting by calling it an opportunity for productive resolution. Frank looked at me across the table, and I could see him trying to find the person he had expected me to be. The person who would take the $40,000, move to a smaller house, and be grateful. I'm prepared to offer $250,000, Gerald said, plus the vehicle and personal items. Mrs. Callaway could also retain any retirement accounts in her own name. Robert wrote something on his notepad. He didn't look up. The business has been independently valued at over $2 million, he said. The marital estate, inclusive of the business, the marital home, and all accounts, totals approximately $3,800,000. My client is entitled to a fair share of that, particularly given evidence of deliberate concealment and misappropriation of marital assets. Gerald smiled the way people smile when they're trying not to look worried. Our valuation differs significantly from your expert's analysis. We look forward to presenting both analyses to the judge, Robert said pleasantly. Frank put his hand on the table. Dorothy. His voice was quiet. Can we just talk for a minute? Just us. Robert started to object and I waved him off. 5 minutes, I said. We stepped into the hallway. Frank and I stood there under fluorescent lights, 37 years between us, and nothing to say. I didn't want it to come to this, he said. Then you should have come to me honestly, I said. 2 years ago, or 5 years ago, or whenever you stopped wanting to be married. You could have talked to me like an adult. His jaw tightened. The business is mine. We built it, I said. I have the original filing from 1988 that says so. I have 20 years of letters and contracts that say so. I have your own signature on documents where you called me your co-owner. You can say it's yours until the judge decides. But Frank, we both know the truth. He looked at the floor. Then he looked up. And for just a moment, I saw something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not calculation, exhaustion. Take the $250, Dorothy. Please. I shook my head and walked back into the conference room. Frank's next move surprised me. He went to our son, Kyle. Kyle called me on a Wednesday night, and I could hear the discomfort in his voice, the way I used to hear pain in patients who were too polite to report it clearly. Dad called me, he said. I know. He said you're taking this further than it needs to go. He said you're just trying to hurt him. I waited a beat. Kyle, do you remember when you were 14 and I used to come home from the office at night and sit at the kitchen table doing accounts until midnight? Yeah. You always had that green ledger book. That ledger book kept your father's business from failing in 1996 when he overbid 3 contracts in a row and we almost couldn't make payroll. I worked for that company for 22 years and I was never put on the books because your father told me it was better that way. Now he's telling a judge I had nothing to do with it. He also spent $60,000 in company money on hotel rooms with another woman. Kyle was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, Mom. You don't have to apologize. I'm just asking you to understand what's actually happening. After we hung up, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window and breathed through the part of the situation that still hurt. Not the money, not the fraud. The part where my son was in the middle. The part where my marriage had been a different story than the one I thought I was living. Then I picked up my phone and texted Robert. We go to trial. The trial began on a cold Tuesday in October in Franklin County Domestic Relations Court. I wore my good blue coat and sensible heels, and I sat beside Robert with my hands quiet in my lap. Frank and Gerald sat at the table to our left. I didn't look at Frank. I looked at Judge Patricia Monroe, a woman in her early 60s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and a demeanor that reminded me of my old charge nurse, someone who had seen everything twice and was not impressed by either volume or style. Gerald's opening statement was polished and confident. Frank Calloway had founded a business through 25 years of hard physical labor and professional expertise. His wife had assisted in administrative tasks in the early years before stepping away entirely. The marital home was purchased using business proceeds from an entity that had always been solely Mr. Calloway's. Mrs. Calloway's claims of co-ownership were, Gerald said, revisionist history. Robert's opening statement was quieter. Your Honor, this case is about erasure. The systematic erasure of a woman's contributions to a business she helped found, managed for 2 decades, and then lost her name on when her husband decided her name was inconvenient. The evidence will show that Dorothy Calloway was not a helper or an assistant. She was a co-founder. Her name was on the original registration. Her signature was on the early contracts. Her labor sustained this company in its most vulnerable years. The evidence will also show that Frank Calloway used that same company as a personal account to fund an extramarital affair and deliberately misrepresented the company's value to this court. Gerald called Frank first. Frank was composed on direct examination. He spoke about building the company from a single pickup truck and a set of tools. He was convincing. He was telling part of a true story. Then Robert stood up. He showed Frank the 1,988 business registration. Mr. Calloway, can you read the names listed here as co-owners? Frank held the paper. Frank Calloway and Dorothy Calloway. Your co-owner and wife, Robert said. Not your assistant. That was before I formally restructured the company. You restructured it in 1995, Robert said. Tax efficiency. On legal advice. I see. And did that restructuring result in your wife receiving any compensation for her ownership share? It was a structural change, not a buyout. So the answer is no, Robert said. She received nothing. She agreed to the change. You have documentation of that agreement? Frank hesitated for just a moment. It was verbal. Robert moved on to the credit card records. Dr. Walsh testified for 2 hours. She walked Judge Monroe through 3 years of financial records with the patience of someone who had done this many times and knew how important clarity was. The $340,000, the apartment, the car, the undervaluation of the business by over $1 million. I watched Judge Monroe's face during that testimony. Amanda was called to testify on the 3rd day. She was younger than I had imagined, in her mid-30s. Composed in a gray blazer. She answered Gerald's questions carefully. On cross-examination, Robert asked her whether she had known the apartment and the car were paid for using funds from the business. Frank told me the business was his, she said. Robert showed her a text message, one of several recovered from phone records. He read it without dramatic emphasis. Another work dinner, haha. Does Dorothy know you write off our hotel as business development? The courtroom was quiet. You sent this to Mr. Calloway in February of 2023, Robert said. Amanda's composure slipped a fraction. I was joking. Of course, Robert said. No further questions. Judge Monroe delivered her ruling on a Friday morning. The courtroom was small and felt full. Megan had flown in from Portland and sat behind me. Kyle was beside her. I had not expected Kyle to come. When I saw him in the hallway beforehand, he hugged me and didn't say anything. And I held on for a moment longer than I meant to. I've reviewed all evidence and testimony in this matter, Judge Monroe began. The documentation presented by Mrs. Calloway's counsel is among the most thorough I have seen in this court. The 1,988 co-registration, the contemporaneous letters, the joint filings, and the witness testimony all establish clearly that Dorothy Calloway was a co-founder and active partner in Calloway Construction for the first 22 years of its existence. Her decision to step back from active management does not erase her foundational role or her legal claim to marital assets. Gerald was very still. Furthermore, the forensic analysis reveals a sustained pattern of financial misconduct. Mr. Calloway diverted marital assets to fund a personal affair, concealed this from his spouse and this court, and deliberately misrepresented the company's value in his initial disclosures. He lied under oath in this proceeding on at least 2 material points. She looked up from her notes. The original business registration alone establishes Mrs. Calloway's co-ownership claim. The fraud makes the accounting significantly simpler. She set out her ruling in measured, careful language. The business, Calloway Construction, is declared marital property. Its true value is set at $2.2 million. Mrs. Calloway is entitled to 50%, or $1.1 million. Mr. Calloway will also reimburse the marital estate for the $340,000 in diverted funds, to be added to Mrs. Calloway's settlement. The marital home, valued at $680,000, is awarded to Mrs. Calloway as additional compensation for fraudulent concealment. Mr. Calloway will pay Mrs. Calloway's legal fees in their entirety. Copies of the financial records indicating potential tax misuse of business funds have been referred to the IRS and the Ohio Department of Taxation for independent review. I felt Robert's hand press briefly on the table beside mine. The marital assets in total, Judge Monroe said, amount to approximately $3.8 million. Given the extent and duration of Mr. Calloway's fraud, waste, and deliberate misrepresentation, I am awarding Mrs. Calloway 68% of that total. The ruling is effective immediately. Calloway has 90 days to satisfy the monetary portions of this judgment. Judge Monroe looked at me for a moment before she stood. Mrs. Calloway, your record-keeping over the course of this marriage was the foundation of this case. Not every person in your situation is able to document what you documented. That discipline protected you. Thank you, Your Honor, I said. The gavel came down, and the room came alive around me. Megan was crying, which she would kill me for telling you. Kyle had his arm around her. Robert was already talking quietly into his phone. Across the room, Frank sat without moving, and Gerald was bent over him speaking quickly, but Frank wasn't listening. He was looking at some point in the middle distance, somewhere past the fluorescent lights and the beige walls, somewhere I couldn't see. I didn't feel what I thought I would feel. No rush of victory. No particular satisfaction at his stillness. I just felt the way you feel at the end of a very long shift. When you've done everything you could do and the outcome was the best it was going to be. 3 weeks later, Robert called me with a final piece of news. Frank's largest subcontractors had reached out. They wanted to buy out my share of the business directly and use the transaction to restructure ownership entirely, removing Frank from day-to-day operations. They offered $1.3 million cash within 60 days. That's above valuation, I said. They want him out, Robert said simply. The investigation, the publicity, the judgment, they can't build client confidence with his name on the paperwork right now. Tell them I accept. I moved into my new house in December. It's in a neighborhood in Worthington, walking distance from a coffee shop I now go to every morning, and a small park where I take long walks in the afternoons. It's not a big house. It doesn't need to be. Megan helped me find it on a weekend she flew in, and we spent 3 days painting the living room, a color called dusty sage that she picked out and I've grown to love. My grandchildren's fingerprints are already on the back door from Christmas. I still volunteer 2 mornings a week at a legal aid clinic in Columbus, where they help women navigate the early stages of divorce proceedings. I am not an attorney. I am a woman who kept her files. What I tell people when I sit across from them is simple. Document everything. From the day you get married, not because you expect something to go wrong, because you are building a life that has value, and value deserves a record. I heard from Kyle in January that Frank and Amanda had separated. Apparently, the relationship had not survived the combination of bankruptcy proceedings and the IRS inquiry. Kyle told me this carefully, watching my face for what I would do with the information. I thanked him for telling me and changed the subject. Here's what I know now, standing on the other side of everything. 37 years of marriage is not erased by what happened at the end. Some of those years were genuinely good. Frank was not always the man he became in those last few years. But I also know that I spent 2 decades making myself invisible inside something I helped build. And I will never do that again. Not in a marriage, not in a partnership, not in any room where what I contribute is being kept off the books. You earn what you document. Remember that. Someone asked me recently if I was lonely. I thought about it seriously before I answered. In the mornings, I have coffee in the kitchen with the window open when the weather allows. I am reading more than I have since my 30s. I went to Megan's in Portland last spring, and we walked the coast for 3 days and talked more than we had since she was a teenager. I have a life that is entirely mine, shaped by what I choose rather than what I accommodate. No, I told her. I'm not lonely. I'm free. The pen I used to sign those papers in Carol's office is still in my purse. I carry it with me, not as a reminder of the worst day, but as a reminder of the day I decided to stop being afraid. I was 66 when everything I thought I knew fell apart. I am 67 now, and I have never been more certain of who I am. If you're listening to this story and something in it feels familiar, if you're sitting somewhere right now, recognizing something you've been afraid to name, I want you to hear this. It's not too late to open the filing cabinet. It's not too late to call the attorney. It's not too late to pick up the pen on your own terms. It is never too late to stand up for what you built. Thank you for being here with me. I'd love to know what city you're listening from. Leave it in the comments, along with whatever's on your heart. And if this story helped you in some way, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. That's why I tell it.